Thank you all for being here this morning. Thank you, Antonia, for inviting me. It's really a pleasure to be here. I know some of you from conferences. I know Antonia for years. We worked together, and she was part of the special issue on language and the self, and since then we regularly meet and have talks and conversations and exchange publications. So it's a real pleasure to be here for me. It's like coming to a place of kindred minds. And the other real big pleasure for me is that she asked me to talk to language psychology. Nobody asked me to talk to language psychology now. And this is really, it means a lot because it's so talk to the real issue somehow, right? Not one single research thing, but what is it? What is that field which is not a field, which I think should be a field? What is about that? So this is what I'm trying to explain. So it's somehow what I develop, where I stand. It's a very positioned narrative you will get. So it's not balanced in terms of not involved, and we have this, and then we have that, and etc. Very detached, but it's very positioned. And if there is some points you feel it's too polemic, tell me. I'm happy to rebalance. But as you know, the history of science and how fields work is a political issue. It's always a decision by institutions, by people thinking the order of things is this and not that. So it's re-questioning a little bit the order of things to language, and of course it's positioned. So let me start. I can do it myself afterwards, but I can do it. So, esteemed colleagues, completely new on the program is the Language Day. More than anything else, the human language seemed to us appropriate to become the subject topic of a common debate between psychologists and representatives of other disciplines. If, as we envision, the contact and the interaction between language experts from different scientific origins, such as linguistics, medicine, philosophy, and psychology, meeting for our language discussion is achieved, if this is the case, we are allowed to expect substantial outcomes. The time is ripe, we believe. More precisely, the sciences that are most specifically and most closely related to the investigation of language are ripe for a language day at our Congress. This is the reason we put it on the program. So, this is the program that is expecting us. I herewith open the 12th Congress of the German Psychological Society. These are the words of Karl Bühler, and, the opening address of the 12th Congress of the German Society for Psychology in Hamburg, 1931. They had a language day. And this is so specific, so special. There was Goldstein, there was many people who are known now, and they were coming together. They were linguists, like he said, right? And this incipient field of language psychology was very interdisciplinary. It was an open debate. And it's interesting that Karl Bühler says the time is ripe for them to come to us, right? That psychology has a kind of integrative function. The language day is gone since. It was 1931. Nobody would have the idea of having a language day on a psychology conference, right? Maybe we have one someday. So in any case, today we can consider this as a kind of language day, at least language morning, let's say, with Javiera and me. And if you be so kind. So this is what I will talk to you about. Starting with Bühler, I gave you one trace. And I continue with the idea of the traces of language psychology and the oscillations which are linked to these traces. Then I jump back several centuries into a powerful original moment where the rhetorical field was eliminated. I do this to make you understand how language was treated, managed to be a certain thing for Western thinking, and how this original decision really influenced our thinking and understanding of language until today. Then I follow the other side. I'm sorry, my voice is a little fragile, but I will manage. I follow the other side, which is doingness and activity. So what is this thread? And as you know, it's more a subterranean, a subliminal thread, but it's very important. It's also very powerful. And this is where people who do dialogical language, who are interested in dialogism, or those who are also interested in activity theory, Neo-Vygotskians, and all these are situated. And then I offer you language psychology as I understand it. It goes beyond the precious inner sight. Precious because it's here inside. Everyone has this unique, wonderful brain we are taking pictures of. It's a precious inner sight which is effectively charged in Western thinking, in sciences. I want to go beyond that. I don't consider it like I don't have this kind of view. And then I conclude. So let's go to the traces. So back to Karl Bühler. He was trained as a physician. He became a psychologist and a language theorist in Würzburg, which was one side of the Gestalt theoretical work. He was then in Munich and in Vienna. In 1940, he was forced to go into migration because of his wife, Charlotte Bühler, who was Jewish, and he didn't want to divorce. So they both went into migration. And you know, Charlotte made a good career in the US, but Karl never could make it. He was broken by this migration. Interestingly, Bühler starts investigating thought processes and Gestalt perception, and then he switched to semiotic processes, Zeichenprozesse. Semiotic processes became central to him to rethink psychology. So he has a big project of rethinking whole psychology. He has this fundamental text, The Crisis of Psychology, where he diagnoses a huge fragmentation. How can we understand psychology? So this is his basic question, and language is a kind of leading thread through this question. He envisions a psychology on the base of the idea of life as self-regulating process and signal exchange. Sounds quite modern, right? It's 1929, okay? And in this context, that he conceives language as an event of an irreducible system of two. Next. So language is for him from the start something that is situated between two. It's a holistic event that involves two partners acting within a concrete perceptual field. It's here and now, right? And please note that for him, and I think I follow this totally, this reality we are oriented towards when we act in this common field, this reality would neither be visible nor thinkable without the mediator language. This is crucial because it's anti-representationalist. It doesn't say we represent language, it says we have an own reality by language. We would not have without it, okay? It's specific. This is the well-known organon model. I don't go into it, but this is how he conceives. So we have the one, the other, and the world they're talking about, right? And the sign mediates this triad. And the organon model is has the same story as the ZPD for Vygotsky. It's where to Bühler is shrinked. So we know Bühler as the organon model, and that's it. And a lot of people know Vygotsky and the ZPD, and that's it, right? So there is, just to have this note next week. So Bühler's book to language theory is called Sprachtheorie, die Darstellungsfunktion der Sprache. It's from 1934, so same time as Vygotsky's, right? So we have, it's exactly the same time, 2934. You have this turbulent, very inspiring time, very violent time between the wars, beginning fascism. 34 is Vygotsky's death, but it's also 31, Stalinism starts. So we are here, right? In German, it was republished in 82, which is pretty late already. Then we have the English translation, the first one in 90, and the first French translation in 2009. It's an excellent translation, but imagine how late it is. Bühler was not read. He's not read, it's purse. So semiotic is purse, it's not Bühler, okay? We have a little bit of the organon model when we do introduction to linguistics, and then we go past it. Now, one thing is really interesting and important to me, it's the translation of Darstellungsfunktion. Darstellung, in English, you say representational function. And also in French, and you have no other word than the Latin word. In German, you have a German word, a Germanic word, and a Latin word. He could have said Repräsentationsfunktion der Sprache. He didn't. He said Darstellungsfunktion. What is Darstellung? Let me tell you, in Germany, you have academies of performance arts. They are called Akademie für Darstellende Künste. So Darstellung has much more to do with performance, with presenting, putting on a stage, making visible, making a reality visible, right, in a specific way. We had this wonderful video yesterday from the, I don't know his name, from the artist. Yes, thank you, Karl Fouquet. So this is a Darstellung. It's a presentation, and it's certainly not a representation. So saying that language has a presentational function makes a whole different story. By the title, you don't get that. You have to read the book, of course, right? But this is one problem with translation. And we need to know such details. And I'm so happy that I have access to this. So you have I don't explain this, I just said it. So you have really the specific relation of language to reality, from representation to presentation. Reality is presented, staged. So we have a system of two in a common perceptual field. We have a system of more of us, right? But we have exactly this perceptual field now, which orient us here, now, her, me, this bottle, etc. And then we can go up into a symbolic field where I talk to Bühler and to Vygotsky, etc., and nothing of them is there, right? So symbolic field, but we are still anchored. Then, so by doing this, we present each other a reality. And by common practice of language mediations or mutual navigation, direct your attention here or there. Think of Bühler, think of the World War, think of Stalinism. Oh, you know, you're wandering around. So navigating each other via the mediator language. Der Mittlersprache. Language is a kind of mediator, and it has specific structures like the Indo-European case system, feminine, masculine, gender in Romance languages you don't have in English, for instance. And this navigates in a specific way, okay? Good, next one, please. What happened? We have World War II. With World War II, we have the rise of technology. because of war, you have this huge mental, practical, very interesting work on codification. Crypting, decrypting. This was extremely important, right? So codifying techniques, information technology. The transfer of information becomes a total figure. So information, I call it a total figure. It eats up everything. You cannot think outside of this one topic, information, okay? And it's understandable because of this social, cultural, historical context. You have instrumentalization of language as information carrier. Information is carried by language, by signs, right? So you have this channel idea. You have a rejection of redundancy of non-information. So information is non-redundant. So if I say a rose is a rose is a rose, I say nothing, okay? No information. But maybe you know that this is a famous poem. So there is no redundancy, of course not. And Barthes was one of those who said repetition is not repetition, okay? So, but this is clearly totally rejected. It's out of the scope of information theory. We have early critics like Reddy, 1979, against this, how is it called, transfer model. Linnell has also this critique. So Verge has the critique. So it's a critique, but it's on the margins, right? If you have a question or you don't know where I am, please tell me, okay? Or if I'm too fast. In human sciences, so this is the whole technical side. And in human sciences, we have structuralism, the well-ordering of science into systems to be deciphered. And this is smoothly followed or echoed by algorithmic workings of the so-called understanding machine. This is my word for Chomskyan generative grammar. And there is critique in some language psychologists. It's an understanding machine because it has to reach a finite state of this is exactly the meaning of the sentence. And Herman, for instance, says we don't need to go to the end. We have a feeling of having understood, and it can be wrong, but it comes early, and that's enough. That works. So it's not an understanding machine, right? But you have this algorithmic idea, and you have another one. So syntax prevails, ordered chains, well-formed combinations generating chains. Well-formed, right? Grammatically well-formed, please. What about language psychology? The last German language psychologist identified in the literature is Friedrich Kainz in 1945. And then we have the rise of psycholinguistics, which replaces language psychology. It's a new field created in the United States, 1945, same year, funny. And it re-imported or imported to Europe and establishing itself as a modern field. So language psychology is historical. And modernity has this capacity to be self-entitled with not regarding history, because it's the sign of modernity to just believe in yourself, right? You don't need the others. So it's a historical remains. The name, the field, the scholars. So there is a whole, it's a kind of oblivion. Translations, readings, you know, the coverage of it. You have European counterpositions, though. The psychologist Hans Hermann, who wrote this wonderful book, Meaning and Understanding, in 1976. It's translated in English, interestingly. And then you have the whole Oslo school, the Northern European, where Linnell, finally, if you know Linnell, is one descendant. Ragnar Rommetveit, maybe some of you have heard of him. He is a Norwegian psychologist, dialogist, and yes, and these scholars early on worked with cultural historical theory, so they received received. They read Vygotsky, and they read Bakhtin, and they did language psychology in the sense I'm trying to advance, okay? But at the periphery geographically and scientifically. Next one. I give you a quote I translated from Hermann, which makes the oscillation a little bit visible. I'm trying to address. We are in Eastern Europe now. Hermann writes in his introduction, "The Russian psycholinguistics has never been psycholinguistics. Although it calls itself as such in English translations, it has always been language psychology." You see how he has a difference here. That is, it never considered itself as science that has to prove the psychological reality of primarily linguistic concepts or theories or models. It came from psychology. This is a very interesting standpoint. He reclaims a psychological stance to language psychology. And you see that this in-between, it's really an in-between the chairs. There's linguistics and there is psychology. Where do I sit? You can only sit in the between, but there is no chair. So you have to arrange one somehow, right? Linguistics, he's against linguistics because it's generative linguistics. He doesn't want to prove the reality of generative rules, for instance, to generate correct sentences. He says this is not the task of language psychology. So psycholinguistics is really a science that was made up to answer, to really follow tasks given to it, right? So it was from the start not an autonomous discipline. It was made up by cybernetics, information technology, generative linguistics, saying, okay, you will have to prove our models. So Hermann against this. Then we have the other issue of the Iron Curtain descending, being there for 40 years. 40? For decades. And the issue of reception and translation of Soviet scholars and their work. You all know how difficult this is, right? Still. So the beginning oscillation between language psychology and psycholinguistics is rapidly resolved. We marginalized otherness, context, sociality. Sociality and otherness could have come from the Soviet psychology, but it didn't. And we were fascinated by the inside, the cognitive machine we have. The invention of the computer was extremely powerful to metaphorize human thinking. And human thinking and machine working are a mutual metaphor. So a computer is a brain, and a brain is a computer, and this is still working, right? So we are very much caught into this kind of bracket. Next. So we have 21st century now, and this is a citation, a quote by Cutler, and Cutler, who was one of the directors of the Max Planck Institute of Psycholinguistics in Nijmegen, a very unique institution in the Netherlands, and paid totally by German taxes. It's interesting. So thus a psycholinguist can be primarily a psychologist, ultimately concerned to understand and explain the mental structures and processes involved in the use of language. But to be properly a psycholinguist, such a psychologist needs also to be concerned about why language has certain universal characteristics. And then the variation. So the interest is really to the universal. It's not to the particular, not to what Voloshinov calls the occasional form, which is a wonderful, the occasional form. It just, yeah. It's the universal, it's the essential, it's not pragmatics, certainly not, right? The variation of an essential. So you have the idea of something essential to all languages, to humanity, and then you have variations of that. So this is very long. I don't want to read it. I just looked at, I will give you this, make this presentation available. So the gist of it, this is the actual, from the actual website of the Max Planck Institute for Psycholinguistics. And they have one research department called Psychology of Language Department. And they say, for decades, psycholinguistics research in the lab. So like single word presentations, is this a word, is this not a word, and you have to tap, and your reaction time is computed, and it's very difficult to reach the sentence level. It's very difficult to reach a conversation level. They try now. And what this person is saying, now we try. We also carry such lab research, but one of our main goals is to understand how speaking, listening, reading, and writing take place in real life context. Look at that, right? So this is what they now try to do. I very welcome this. Next one. But there is a thing, a problem with the guiding theoretical principle, that there is a small set of basic cognitive components that in different combinations cover all of the ways language is used in everyday and laboratory contexts. So there's again this idea of something, yeah, you got that, right? It's something we could discuss. I mean, you can think of that, but you can also think differently. And I would like to advocate for having different guiding theoretical principles in language psychology. Okay. So now the oscillation is completed, and cognitive sciences is the site where language is researched. Looking at the APA divisions, 56 divisions, none is devoted to language. Any language-related term is not included in any division's name. You have very remote divisions, like names. I don't give any examples. I don't want to offend anybody, but you have really very specific divisions, but nothing about language. This is intriguing, and it's, I don't understand. Where is it? So it's somewhere in cognitive science, it's within this. It's from the phantasm, from the understanding, it's in this inside. It's in the precious inner sight. And it's also considered a transparent medium to deeper processes. So you can just reach through, right? You have language. Oh yes, people tell you something, and then you say, oh yes, there is the proper thing, right? So it's framed by methodological individualism. It has the total agent and his intentions. Total agent, I can explain this later, it's not so important, but the single person is a total agent. The other is optional. The context is more a problem than anything else. And we go with the atoms of language. So we always start, and this is any introduction to language and language psychology, we always start with the tiny little atoms, phonemes, morphemes, words, sentences, texts maybe, right? We have always a pre-given structure, a system, and we have pre-verbal mental entities. So we have something before, which is put into a language vestment. And then we have language, and then we use language. Okay? Using language is a very ambiguous phrase. I don't know if we use language. Like, I use this, right, and I put it away. I cannot use language because I can't put it away. And each time I use language, I change and it changes. Each time I use this, it gets a little worn out maybe, but my hand doesn't change its form. This thing doesn't grow smaller or something. If I use language, if I speak, it changes. It changes me, it changes you. Tiny, tiny little things, right? And this is how it lives. Otherwise, we would speak like the cavern people. Okay, next. Okay, let's go to the powerful original moment. Any question of clarification up to now? Do you need to ask me something you didn't understand quite? Okay. So, just for a short recapitulation, we have Bühler systems of two who are in a concrete common field, right? This is Winston. Where's Winston? Wilson, I'm sorry. Field. Okay? It's really such an important idea. The field. But we are never alone. There is an audience. Even if we are alone, there is an imaginary audience, right? Here we have the perfect situation. You are the audience, we will have a small discussion or debate, and you are the audience, and there is even camera, so there is remote audience too. So the whole rhetorical field is present. Otherness, publicness, activity and praxis, okay? Next, please. A further important remark. Speaking, we speak for another and others, as well as for ourselves. When I speak now, of course I address you, but I address also myself, right? We always speak to ourselves, and this is so brilliant about language. It's not something I use and I put them there. It's something that has an effect and touches myself. And speaking is public and personal. It's social, societal, and individual. It lives in this triad of self, other, audience. Okay, so this is what I would like to set up. And now we do the jump, 4th century before Christ, or before current era. The trialogic thinking of rhetoric, the self-other audience, is curtailed by Socrates insisting on the dialogue, me, you, okay? And consciously suppressing the audience as the real addressee of the dialogues. This is Andreas Hetzel, 2011. He's a philosopher who wants to advocate for a rhetorical understanding of language, going further into philosophy. Next one. So, insisting on the dialogue, Socrates and Plato finally uses the other to eliminate the question to the benefit of statements of knowledge. So you have these dialogues, let's say, on what is the truth, what is the beauty, what is the good. And there is this back and forth, and Plato, Socrates analyzes, and then, okay, so truth is da-da-dum, okay? And then there is an answer. We could say that, this and that. Eliminating the other's questions result in eliminating the other himself, finally, and the other is the sophist. The sophist is the big enemy of Socrates, which is understandable from the historical situation. Michel Meyer, another philosopher, said, Plato focused on answerhood as the elimination of problems. This means that answerhood is considered in itself and not in reference to questions. Answers have become propositions, so they are detached from their coming, right? Questioning has disappeared as sophistic or heuristic, at any rate, as the opposition of knowledge. Knowledge is not questions. Knowledge is propositions, has a propositional form. Are you familiar with what a proposition is? So it's just a very plain statement. You can sit here. Like Chile has a bloody past. Okay. Good. We can say, of this proposition, we can say, I don't think Chile has a bloody past. Maybe a present, but not the past, right? We could say different things, right? Questions, debate. So we can frame this proposition in different illocutionary acts, if you like, okay? But this is just the plain information. And for any language process model, they take proposition as the first step. You have a proposition which is totally unpositioned. And the position will come afterwards, okay? When you know where it has to go. But first you have this proposition, you have your idea, and then you will see, oh, I will say this to her and this to him. Okay, so this is the grounding idea. And it's interesting because you get this totally unpositioned statement, okay? So the spoken listened word is left behind by the still vision of truth. This is, I see the truth, I do not listen to it anymore in a debate, right? It's not whatever we know, the certain knowledge is outside of here, because this is the ever-changing manipulatory thing of the sophists. Truth is somewhere else. And it's certain, it's unpositioned because it's the truth. It's impersonal. It's not political in a sense. I'd like to just say that Plato needed to make sure that nobody would be put to death like his teacher Socrates, which was a big sorrow. So this is one background to it. So do not blame Plato, because it's really about how can it be that such a man was put to death by politicians, right? By the polis. This is one try to make things certain outside of human affairs. Okay. So, given this move, the Western tradition is heavy with the oblivion of the question to the answer, the other to the self. A lived common situation, we are always somewhere situated, social, historical, cultural. It also forgets about the bodies that are language acting, like I do, and you also do somehow in your listening positions, which is very cultivated. Of course, listening is supposed to be still, right? But you still do things. Language falls into the gap separating body and mind. There's more to this to say, but just this shortly. Language becomes a visual structure of elements used to vehicle thoughts. Reason is always higher, it's untouched, it's pure. I would say even it's male. Language is female. Think about Wittgenstein's saying the bewitching of the mind by language. There is a very ambiguous relationship of Western thinking to language. It has to be made pure, or we should not let it touch my mind and thinking, right? We should have it separated. And alphabetic writing adds another element to this. This is where you got the visual structures. You see words. You don't listen to them anymore. Next one. For the sophists, and now I'm going to the thread of doing this. The other side, staying with the sophists for a moment. The sophists were blamed by the whole Western tradition, and we are maybe trained in this. But it's really interesting what they did, and it's the first Western thinking of language which is really which matters. The sophists considered that we are carried off by language, we are displaced, we are moved. There is something happening to us, and this is interesting to them. How does it happen, and can we teach it? Can we make a technique out of it, right? Truth happens through the logos here and now, within the tension of self-other audience. What I do now is the same. I try to make my logos true, right? I try to convince you of, and this is always what we do. What should we do else? Should I say this is true? I cannot. How could I? So they acknowledge the whole ambivalence and also the power of language. And this is a chapter of Western thinking. Get rid of the power of language. It's terrible. Put it into rhetoric. Put it into poetics, into arts. It's there. It's okay. But not in science. Do not use metaphors in science. Do not use whatever, right? You would make it not good. One of the most famous sophists is Gorgias, and he has a very nice idea to deception induced by tragedy. He says, the one who deceives is more right than the one who does not. And on the other hand, the deceived one understands more than the one who is not deceived. So if you follow a play, you follow a lead into another reality and you are somehow deceived, right? It's not the truth. So Helena was driven by Paris' wonderful words to follow him. And then this was then the War of Troy. This was a very big debate in ancient Greece. Did she follow him? What did he do? What was the role of the words? Is Helena to blame or Paris to blame? So you can have a tragedy on this topos, and you follow into this. So you are somewhere, and you all know that art has this moving power where we are in another reality where we can understand something about our mundane reality. So this is the deception and cognizing moment at the same time. I think we all have it. When you read a novel, you are transported by Hogwarts and you understand something, right? So I think there is big truth there, and it's also the danger. So we don't want that. We don't want to be deceived. Of course not. We want to speak about objective reality. Please stay in the reality. Okay. Then, some centuries later, German Romanticism rediscovered the ear as a sense which is accorded truth knowledge. So typically it's only vision. Now it's the ear. So Herder, it's the one who started that. And they also valued language as closely related to thinking. Romanticism is a general movement in Europe in the 18th century and is a reaction against rationalism of Enlightenment. And in Germany, this stance was foremost associated with Kant's philosophy, and the reaction wanted to counter emotions, even warmness, feelings, creative spirit. So concerning language, we cannot speak of a romantic language notion, but of loose threads. And these loose threads were woven together by Wilhelm von Humboldt. And he developed this into a genuine philosophy and science of language. Next one. He took up 3 specific ideas. Language is related to knowledge. Language is endowed as psychological dimension. So we have a shift here, reason to language. Second, language is an auditive event. If something that happens in time, it has a development and articulation in time. So there's time and the other. Immediately, you have the process and the other. In the moment you get away from the visual, you have process and others. Yes. This is what I was just saying. Processes, others listening. So what happens now here is really the opening of the monologic subject to listening to the other and to oneself. This is really a crucial step, this change of the senses, right? So we are open now to the spoken and addressed word, and this is of course also public. So we really open this closed up, precious side monologic. Third idea, diversity. The new attention for the diversity of languages, individuality of national languages is a central issue to the Romantics. Plurality leads to conceive the social character of languages. There's a start here which leads further into linguistic anthropology and typology of languages. What's important here is that they started to look at languages as a plurality of mentalities, of ways of perceiving reality. And they were staying with this plurality. So no universality, but plurality. Look at the differences. This is what matters. Yes? So there's one really important practice that supports this experience. And you are all in a very privileged position because you all have more than one language. So be very aware of that. Particularly the hegemonic scientific world of North America, most people have only one language. They can't even imagine another perspective. You can. So cherish this, appreciate and make it important to whatever you do. This is really a privilege. You live in diversity and plurality. And of course nobody wants that because it creates, oh, who am I and what are you doing, and you have to be correct and in the box. But this is, there it starts. And they translated the main European works like Cervantes, they translated also the Bhagavad Gita. So they went to Eastern thinking. Humboldt learned, his brother Alexander was exploring here, right? From his brother, Humboldt got non-Indo-European languages, so he looked into totally different structures. Imagine another reality. And becoming aware of that, this is so important. And this is, yeah, I can just, you hear my voice is just going up. Okay, so this is so important, good. So we have these three shifts: reason to language, eye to ear, universality to diversity. And on these grounds, Humboldt developed his energetic notion of language. Language is an energeia, it's a process, it's a doingness. It's not something language and then use, it's only use. It's not use, it's doing. Okay, it's activity. So use means there is something before I put to use. No, it's doing, it's this. It's nothing more, but it's nothing less. So this makes it also so difficult. Saussure passed him for different reasons. So 1901, Cours de Linguistique Générale, it made it. But Humboldt's language philosophy was read by the Soviets. They all read German. They read Bühler, they read Humboldt, they read, Goldstein. And we have a true Russian Humboldtianism, starting with Potyebnya, who radicalizes even Humboldt, saying, it's only in the other's mouth that one's own word can become understandable. It's only through the other that I understand what I'm meaning, my intention. It's only through the other's reply that I know what I'm saying, right? Mm-hmm. Then we have this context. Notice that Yakubinski, Voloshinov, Partin, Vygotsky, they're all the generation of the 1890s, all more or less same generation. Yakubinski, a linguist on dialogic speech, a text still only fragmentarily translated in English. It's the incipient text to dialogism, I would say. Valentin Voloshinov, I would only mention that discourse in life and discourse in poetry, discourse is in Russian Slovo, and Slovo is the spoken word. It's the incarnation. There's a whole philosophy to the Slovo. So discourse, it's totally not a good translation. It's the spoken word, how it lives there and there, right? Martin and Vygotsky, and I like very much this early text. It sounds very behavioristic. It's reflexology. And then you have thinking and speech, and chapter 7, if you know Jakubinsky, you think he has just written everything from Jakubinsky to explain in a speech. Abbreviation and all that, right? So this is one context, and you see what's constructed here. It's Eastern Europe, and it didn't go through, right? So maybe we can you make this a little bigger? Can you plus, like control string here? No, it doesn't work. Okay, no, okay. Okay. You cannot see it, so I will just make it very brief. This is Jakubinsky. He has time and the other to explain language. And for me, this is the most interesting way to approach language. It's not working through the division of writing and talking. It's not working through monologism or monologic or dialogic acts. All language is dialogic, but it has 4 specific types, forms. You have dialogic forms of speech and monologic forms of speech. And the monologic is what I'm doing. I have only more time, but I'm still addressing and still desiring the reply. Kant's critique of reason is also a big monologic form, which needs and desires a reply, of course, yes. So there is no monologic form like closed up. And you have written and oral monologic forms, and you have written and oral dialogic forms. So you have 4 language types. And with this plurality of types, you can understand all the forms we have. I think this is extremely useful, but this would be an own workshop. Okay, next. And Vygotsky, maybe you can decipher a little bit. This is to chapter 7. So in chapter 7, you have the influences far away, Humboldt, Potiebnia, Voloshinov. Then more to the inner, you have Jakubinsky, Stanislavski. Jakubinsky for the idea of abbreviation and predicativity. Stanislavski for the affective and volitive plane behind all planes. You have Frédéric Bolland for the difference between sense and signification, a wonderful piece. And you have Fossler and Paul, the incongruence between subject and predicate. I cannot go into the details, but just to contextualize this thinking, how rich it is and how many tradition it has, right? Yes, please. Okay, just briefly. Of course, we have also things in Western Europe. Austin discovered in 1962 that we can do things with words. This is pretty late, I would say. It's the first time after the sophists, so there are, I don't know how many centuries between them. But this was at least really, it was very good. So how to do things with words? Then we have speech act theory. And then we have Brunner, who acclaims the terrible translation of Vygotsky's book in 1962. And do me a favor, do not use 1962 translation. But Brunner was one of the promoters of Vygotsky, as you all know, right? But it's also in a very specific way. And I would say the whole language psychological dimension is not really a knowledge because psychology is not really interested in language. Psychology is interested in thinking, at this time at least. Yes, please. In the 70s, we have the discovery of the interaction as a site of language development and even of enculturation. We have a growing enthusiasm for the intimate diet of mothers and infants. We have the notion of intersubjectivity. There's a kind of opening of the subject, regaining the subjects at least in their mutual attachment. But I think this is still a 1+1 model. It's the inter, we spoke about this yesterday. The inter is really crucial. How do you do inter? Do you add 1 + 1 and then you shake hand and then you are interrelated? What's that exactly? How do you go from an additive model to a dialogical related model, right? And in Tomasello's work you have, for instance, or Nelson, we have common intentions, common shared meanings. How? How does this work? Is this telepathy? No, of course not. We need to talk to this inter in a much more substantial way, in a much more material way, right? Okay, next. Activity theory, social cultural theory, neo-Vygotskian approaches. The problem here is that language is considered a tool I take and put to use. In Vygotsky there is this tool idea, but in the late Vygotsky there is a shift. And this is not really seen, I think. Schotter did a brilliant work. Conversational realities is really wonderful. Gergen still does. And then we have these fragments, narrative psychology, positioning theory. You all know, right? So we have issues, concepts which need clarification, such as thinking and its relation to speaking. Do we relate? How do we relate? Why not relate? Where is language? Is language in the head, or is the head in language? Or both? How does it work? Subject, other. Agentivity, what about passivity? Do we have any dimension of passivity in agentivity? I think so. We have to acknowledge this. We cannot say, I do everything by myself, and like Münchhausen, I'm developing out of myself by myself. This would be the total agent. I'm leaning on others in the true sense. Body, movement, emotions. So it's very much also what you pointed yesterday. This is missing. We need to include it. Plurality, difference, plurality. Okay, just stay. So, the language psychology I'd like to offer you. Language psychology is the question for language. It's not the question for identity, for self, for positions, for play, for memory, among others. It's the question for language and its role, its existence, its function in human life. I look at self, identity, problem-solving, play to understand how language lives for us. So this is really different rate. With the question to language in human life, we are faced with the irreducible fact that language is politics. Language is the site of politics, for instance, declaring one language, one genre, one type of language activity standard. And that is the hegemonic form. English, correct writing. What I have, it's not my language, it's not your language, it's our lingua franca, but it's more. It's telling you, you are not part of them. and I try to be, and I have another possibility of access, but still I have to work also a lot on my English text, right? This makes invisible that this is just one of the many forms of language. This gets rid of plurality, of your plurality, of my plurality, of multilingualism. It's reducing us for political reasons. Staying with plurality, we can consciously criticize the privileging of certain forms. And this is why I tell you, cherish your language heritages. It's one of the best gifts you have as psychologists. We can see how education, public discourses, politics train us to undo the plurality to the benefit of the one hegemonic voice. Thus, language psychology is for me also important, no, not thus. Then, after this political stance, I have a theoretical one for you. Language psychology is language theory in the first place. So I do not jump into empirical work and measure and count and whatever. Theory. I'm not committed to empirical research, and I think language theory should not be committed to empirical research from the start, like psycholinguistics is committed. Thus, language psychology allows a historical, critical, and theoretical reflection on language as object of research and on its conceptual understanding. It's not automatically aligned with the cognitive paradigm. With its grounding critical reflective take, language psychology is appropriate to a theoretical and critical psychology, I would say. How can we do critical psychology with transfer model of language? I don't think it works. With this, we can seek to formulate alternatives to the prevailing, colonizing, individualistic stance in psychology, methodological individualism in the human sciences. In particular, language psychology reclaims a reflection of language within psychology that works against the still prevailing understanding of language as transparent medium, granting access to proper inner psychological processes without being part of these. One of the most used instruments of psychological research is the interview. It's unreflectively taken to give a simple access to the person's inside. Language is a transparent medium. We can just read to look behind, deeper. Interesting sides, right? Behind and deeper. We, the uninvolved questioners. Again, the rhetoric field is forgotten. It's cut down to a single element, the subject speaking. Language psychology, working beyond the confines of individual cognition and psyche, offers a view on language as holistic, situated, dynamic, performative, and dialogical event in time and space. I think that this view can be useful for qualitative research in developmental psychology and thinking, problem solving. It offers a complex approach, an approach which is complex enough, I would say, to acknowledge the dialogic unfolding and shaping of meaningful forms in time. For this reason, language psychology is certainly not interchangeable with psycholinguistics. It's not just the same. These two fields have really different ethos, and an ethos gives different theory, different concepts, different methodologies, empirical studies. It's a whole different chapter that comes. So the ethos is crucially different. In its theoretical critical dimension, language psychology is an indispensable element to psychological work with language and to psychological research on language. How can it be that students of psychology learn so little about language, coming to consider it nothing but another object, a thing of research maybe they are not involved with? How can it be that psychology students have mostly no concept of language whatsoever, where language is their medium of work? I assume that one of the main underlying problems here is the general tendency of Western thinking to reify everything. So we create entities out of everything, and this is substance philosophy. You have substances, like all this is substance, and then you have the problem, okay, they have to be moved, right? How you get them to move and to interact. This is where you got the problem of inter, because you have already fixed entities. The other philosophy is process philosophy. You have processes given, and out of these processes you have this, and this, and this, and this. Then you have a different problem. You have to say, okay, so what's permanence? Where is permanence? How can I be the same while interacting with you now and yesterday? You recognize me, right? Fortunately. So, but this is where we should go, I think. We should really shift to process philosophy, and this means to shift the whole concepts. Language is process, identity is process, self is process, memory is process, whatever, right? It's really a process, and then you have to answer different things, different questions. How do you recognize? What is permanence? What is a structure? Not everything is just emergence. We are not inventing us each and every time. Dialogicality is nice because it says, I'm coming to the end, it says historicity, dialogical intertextuality, right? I know, I saw this. Okay, in my theoretical work I aim to follow this process thread, lead. And because it's such a substantial shift, it's really complex to make all the concepts working differently, right? And in my empirical work, I'm mostly a theorist, so the empirical work I have is mostly with others, working with their material, and we try to follow also the lead of the process. So, like this Vygotsky idea of follow the movement, and how can we follow a movement, right? It's also this saying by Engels, it's only in motion that a body is recognizable or understandable. So follow the motion. How do you follow a butterfly? If you nail the butterfly down with the spin, it's beautiful to look at, but it's not the butterfly. So how do you follow a butterfly? This is really a very intriguing question. Okay. I'd like to end now. My last two slides are two empirical illustrations, but there is no time for that, and this is what I suspected. So I just show you to them, them to you, and we can talk any time about this, of course, but just let me, just show them. Yes. So this is the one thing I wanted to show you. It's interiorization. Interiorization is such an intricate thing. So what is it? How does it work? And Andrea and me, we reconsidered, and we have a succession of 3 movements here: reversion, transposition, and decoupling. I cannot go deeper in this, but this is really the crucial, because you have to link these common social processes to processes with yourself. I don't say inside, because it can also be outside with yourself, right? So the container thing is another function. With yourself, away from the other, and with the other. So you have to conceive this, and yeah, so this is my take on that. And the other one. This is a very interesting conversation I just analyzed for an identity chapter I wrote. Can you just give the next, because we cannot play that. This is, and the next. Thank you. So you have this short stretch, it's a couple of seconds, where Jay-Z, the rapper, you know the rapper Jay-Z? I didn't know him, so you are, okay. And he tells about how within the black community, people tell each other, you're talking white. So this voice is so interesting, and my students also tell me that they experience this by other peers, right? In the moment they got good grades, they are stigmatized by their peers. So this internal racism, we have also internal sexism, like women to women, which I was always very intrigued by and shocked, and my own one and others, I mean, I'm just part of it, of course. So this internal thing is at stake here, and this is where my analysis starts, where he says, and people were like, you're talking white. And then he develops this, and my analysis is a dialogical analysis of voices, and I show that he has 4 voices coming into dialogue to create a specific identity for this moment, and how this is fielded. It really uses the field at stake. Like I'm using the field, right? I'm Antonia and my papers, and I'm walking, so I use the field for my rhetorical purposes. How he does this. And yeah, it's just so amazingly interesting. Okay, so this is outside and inside, and this is thank you.